This is Your Own Best Company, a podcast and community for creative people who value and enjoy working alone. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Your Own Best Company. This is a podcast for people who love working alone. My name is Franklin Taggart, and this podcast is my idea. I'm happy to welcome back repeat guest Audrey Holst is here again today. And this very well could turn into just a potpourri kind of an exercise, because we're jumping into just having a conversation with each other that doesn't have much of an agenda other than to just make a connection. So welcome back, Audrey.
I'm happy to be back.
Wonderful. We've been kind of chit-chatting in our couple of times of interacting. We've been chit-chatting about just a real growing and deep desire for a return to real human connection. And that's kind of a loaded topic for both of us based on what we've said so far. So I want to let people in on that conversation and let them eavesdrop on some of the things that we've been talking about. Can you talk a little bit about why is that coming up for you these days?
I think one of the biggest things that I am experiencing around this topic is, and I've had this conversation with a couple of other people in my circles, is this real conflict, and I think conflict is the right word to be using here, or contrast between having a digital business, essentially, right? I have a coaching and consulting business, and I do all of my, marketing conversations online, right? A lot of my work I do over the phone. I have conversations via Zoom. So I use technology in order to have the business that I have. And this real desire to engage in the physical world, right? Like engage with things that are physical and real. So like when I think about stuff that makes me feel good, the first thing is not a computer that comes to mind. The first thing that comes to mind is, being outside nature. We were just talking about right now, we're transitioning into fall, and I have a visceral reaction to this season. The colors, the smells, everything about it is just so engaging and pleasurable to me. Yeah. So that is, and so that relates to how I want to relate to other people also, is I want to have interactions with people that feel real, for lack of a better term, and feel human, which is not always accessible in a digital space. That's sort of my starting point on this topic.
That's a good starting point. For me, it's very similar. When this season comes around, I was talking about this is my favorite season, because it's the beginning of an inward cycle for me that lasts for a couple of months, which is really important for my psychological makeup, for one. But the other thing that's really interesting is that I become a little bit more tuned in to the need that I have for real, genuine connection with people. It's like there's a part of me that, I love the inwardness, and I love the introspection, and I love the reflection and all that stuff that happens this time of year. But I also love, putting a pot of stew on and having some cornbread and inviting a couple of people over,
Yes. Yes.
Just to share some warmth with each other. That's a really important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there are so many, it's an interesting time of year too, because we did touch upon this a little bit before we started recording, but this time of year starts to socially ramp up for a lot of us, right? In the United States, there is this Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas or Hanukkah. There's this kind of ramp up, it feels like, with the holiday seasons that to me in the past has felt really intense, kind of frenetic, sort of like very, stressful, for lack of a better term, because I have the same desire as you, where I feel like I want to go inward and slow down. And I think that all of that is possible, like with, with the season, the way that things are built in, but I don't think that everybody has that built into their rituals or built into their family traditions. And there's a lot of, running around and going here and there and attending this and attending that in the name of tradition. And I think that this year, I think people are also starting to maybe examine tradition in a different way or examine rituals in a different way and actually maybe say, a lot of people had to press pause on things last year. And I think that now coming back to it, they're having different thoughts or feelings about what actually they do want to engage in going forward.
Yeah, it was like there was a big break in the action, and then all of a sudden it's like we're like looking at, well, what do we want to add back in?
Yes. Yes. It's so true. It's like the pendulum has definitely swung, I think, in the way we've experienced, right? You can't, I'm trying to see how I can express this, right? You can't notice a thing until you get a long enough break from a thing in order to notice that it was a thing to begin with, right?
Exactly.
And so, so it's like we weren't really able to discern that anything was happening until stuff stopped. And then now we're like, oh, wait a minute. And one of the things that I've noticed is so interesting during this time. There's been a lot of people who have gotten diagnoses, you know where I'm going with that.
Diagnoses would work.
Diagnoses that they weren't actually even able to access before because they had been masking so hard in regular, and these are people who like neurodivergent folks, right? Yeah. Who were masking so hard in the typical, I'll put these in quotes, right? Typical society roles and all that sort of stuff. And when they were able to kind of step back and connect with themselves a little bit more, they were like, hold up, wow, this is different, right? Yeah. So a lot has been shifted, and I think a lot will continue to shift. And we are certainly not, that pendulum is not going to swing to that same location that it was prior.
I don't think it can.
Yeah.
It may be just continuing to swing in a whole new direction.
It's circling now. It's not even swinging back and forth. We are in a circular pattern. Nobody knows what's going to happen.
Yeah. Anybody who thinks that they can foresee the future, I think, is really misinformed.
I think that that's actually one of the things that maybe is drawing us more towards that human connection and is making us, right? We want to check in with other people to be like, are you feeling the same thing that I'm feeling? Are you in the same place that I am? That's one of those things, social media, I think we touched upon our previous conversation. I think that this is something that will continuously come up in conversation, is just the impact that social media can have on us when we're looking around, wanting to relate to people.
Yeah. And
not finding something relatable in this curated digital space and feeling like there's something wrong with us. Meantime, we don't see the reality, right, of people.
Oh, yeah. We see a lot of polish.
Yes.
And we were talking before the record button got pushed, a little bit about, I'm starting to just feel like, I've pushed the last needle in my arm as far as content is concerned. And I can't take any more. It's like, if I have any more content, I will die from it, and that's how I've been feeling lately. And it's like, content cannot replace the face-to-face interaction. And even in the, a Zoom interaction is, a thirst quencher. And, but this constant stream of, look at what I'm doing. Look at what I'm doing. This is what I'm eating. This is what I'm doing. This is my pet. This is what they're doing. And it's like, oh my God, I cannot take anymore.
Totally. Did you notice when that shifted for you? Was there anything that just kind of clued you where you're like, oh, this has definitely changed?
It's been kind of gradually coming on for a long time, but just a few weeks ago, I realized that I just had to put it down. I had to put it down. And there was an imperative to it.
Mm.
It wasn't, it'd be nice to just take a break from this for a while. It was like, this has to happen now.
Mm.
And I don't know, it's kind of like an addict who hits bottom and they just say, I cannot continue to live like this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
Totally.
I don't
Totally.
I don't know what the implications of that are. I'm certainly not looking for yet another piece of content to tell me what the remedy for this is.
You're not going to Google that and see
Yeah.
see what the remedy is.
I think what it is I think there's kind of a calling on my soul level that says, you know, you need to brush this off, and you need to come back home to yourself for a while.
Mm.
And I'm feeling more and more that that's an urgency.
Mm. It seems like the timing of this, considering the time of year, is pretty makes sense. Pretty coordinated, I guess.
Yeah. So I don't know. How are you feeling about all of that? Social media and digital pollution and everything else.
Something something that I guess a question that's always in the back of my mind is how big does my circle need to be? You know, like, I think that that's something that I'm constantly interested in. And when I say interested, sometimes it's I'm stressed about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's, you know, freaked out about it. Sometimes it's like, oh, my circle's too small. Or you know, I can't remember the term. Michael Roderick had used it, and it was this whole concept of that you can only hold a certain amount of people like in your mind at a certain, do you know what that term or what I'm talking about exactly?
I've heard of it, but I don't know the exact term. I've heard the concept expressed before.
Right. Yeah. And so I get curious about that sort of stuff because you know, the work that I do, my journey as a human being, I'm always coming back to just the core of who we are as a human being, like how our nervous systems work, how our bodies are wired, you know, what makes sense. And this, you know, how many people can we be connected with in a certain amount of time? And what is that? So, you know, I think about, all the people I follow on Instagram or who follow me on Instagram or on Facebook or LinkedIn and looking at like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of connections, right? Yeah. I mean, I'll put connections in quotes because that doesn't really mean anything. But hypothetically, right, there's all of these connections. And, you know, versus like the depth of connection, right? And like my immediate circles or even like colleagues or, you know, peers, mentors, it can feel really, you know, as a business owner and as somebody who's in a growth phase, right? I'm looking to expand, right? I want to reach more people. I want to get my message in front of more people. And like, what does that look like? I think there's a lot of talk around, you know, just numbers, just like numbers and numbers and numbers. And I want to interrogate that a little bit, you know, like I want to get curious about that and wonder, is it all about numbers? Is it all about quantity? Can we talk about quality a little bit? Can we talk about depth? Can we talk about those things? And I think it's a both and conversation, but I do get curious about that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's both quantity and quality. I think we have to be concerned with both. As you were speaking, I was reminded of a book that I read back in the 90s, and it was one of the most succinct and powerful books that I've ever read about human relationships. And it's called The Space Between Us. It was by a woman named RuthEllen Josselson. That book still, it gives me goosebumps to think about the way that she gave us a language to express the different ways that we connect with each other. And she talks about that, and she identified, I think she did, first of all, she did a really cool study over a period of several years, interviewing people about the types of connection that were important to them.
Mm.
She identified over the course of the research, she identified 8 categories of connection that we find with each other that are all essential for our human health, right?
Mm.
And what she talked about is that, I don't know that she came up with this, I might have come up with it, but I imagined it as concentric circles.
Mm.
That we have graduated levels of circles that people come into. And the outer circles are just simply circles of awareness. It's like we're aware of each other, or they're aware of me, or I'm aware of them. But it gradually moves in. And what's really funny is that in my marketing, I've taken that model and adapted it for marketing.
Mm.
And it's the same thing as every funnel. It's just like you're taking people from aware to interested to, to committed to experienced, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But each one of those levels of connection is an important piece. So the thing that's really interesting is, like, we have the capability to actually be connected to everyone in the world.
It's wild.
We don't have the capability to have an intimate relationship with everyone in the world. We have that capability with only a few people. But the thing that's really interesting in what she proposed was that even those outer circles had a level of importance that we need to take seriously.
Yes.
We need to have a sense of embeddedness in a larger community.
Yes.
We need to have a sense of identity that is a role or a set of roles that we adopt in relation to the place that we live and the communities that we're a part of. So a fascinating book. Again, it's called The Space Between Us by RuthEllen Josselson. I think it's still available on Kindle. And I know that you can find used copies of it around, but very powerful book. The one thing that I really came away with in that book is the importance of mutuality.
Yes.
And that has been my thirst for the last couple of years, and it was really coming on even before the pandemic hit. I just had a real craving, not for people that I could serve or people who could serve me, but people who were having, the same level of experience and could understand each other, very deeply that way. And so one of the things that I've been engaging in over the last 2 years is finding groups like the ones that we've been, the ones where we met, where it's just, these are people who are in the same line of work. They're people who are basically at a similar level of achievement, people who have very similar interests, and that mutuality. And it has really fed me in ways that I didn't expect to be fed, but and now I don't want to do without it. It's been really wonderful.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, I can really resonate with that. There is I can't remember, there was the internet is full of wonderful things, right? And there's this meme that I have saved somewhere that is essentially, and I can't remember which language it is. I want to say it's Arabic, but I could be completely wrong about that. So don't quote me on that. But there is a language that basically has all of these different words to reference different levels of friendship.
Yeah.
So it's like and we don't have that in the English language, really, right? Like we have, certain kinds of ways to talk about relationships, but we don't have that, this is this level of friendship versus this level of friendship versus this level of friendship, which I think not having the language for it can also be complex, where you're like, well, quote unquote, like friends do whatever it is. Well, yeah, different friends, like you said, different circles, different relationships, different ways of relating. And I think I love what you've talked about, that mutuality, because I think that really brings us back to that whole humanity aspect, where we can't be, I think that there is this power play between maybe marketing and the consumer, or maybe even entrepreneurs and possible clients. I think that there was a bit of a power play before that was allowable or normal,
Yeah.
but that is not going to be tolerated going forward.
Our tolerance is lowering.
Which is which I think is a great thing. Like
Yeah.
I think it's a great thing, and I think those of us who, like you said, have a tendency towards that mutuality, or an interest or a hunger or a desire for that mutuality, I think that is really beneficial. I think that's where we want to be with clients. That's where we want to
Yeah.
be with, I'm not this guru standing on a hill that's going to like deliver unto you all of my knowledge. No, I have a certain set of skills, and we are going to work in conjunction with each other to, meet your goals, or whatever the language is that you use in your modalities. But
Yeah.
I think that lower tolerance for that is a good thing.
It feels like it to me. It feels like that there's a liberation that's happening
Mm.
from kind of old patterns of expectations. And, like I said, the way that roles are performed and the way that things show up, all that's been changed to a large degree because, like you said, we've had a break from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, what if you are sort of thinking about moving forward, and it sounds like this is sort of an introspective time for you anyway, so I imagine
Yeah.
what you come up with on the other side may be different than what you theorize now, but like, where are you sort of seeing things moving forward?
Well, I do a lot of thinking about that. I really feel like that there's a necessity at this point for, I call the marketing model that I'm working on human to human marketing,
Mm.
because it honors the relationship that people have. And I'm not just saying that to give it like, kind of lip service. The client relationship is really, really important and valuable to me, not just for the transactional part of it, but because there's a human on the other end that I want to be connected with in a meaningful way, right?
Right.
And it's like one of the things that's been really interesting is that as a coach, it's been really tricky because I get attached to the clients that I serve. And then when our agreement is over and they disappear, there's almost an injury quality about that to me, especially if they don't ever get back in touch again. And so that's something that I probably need to work on my own personal self. But there's a part of me that wants continuity. Mm-hmm. There's a part of me that says this relationship really has value to me. And it's like, I don't want it to just be discarded because our agreement says that it's over,
Mm-hmm.
So those are some things that I've been kind of toying with in my own mind about what is this and how does it show up. I would rather serve 10 people over a course of 10 years than 1,000 people over the course of 6 months,
Yeah.
That's the kind of person that I am. And our friend Kat Stanzik kind of pointed it out to me, and she said, the one thing that you have to have is connection. Whoever tries to sell you anything, if they're not connected to you, you're not even going to pay attention to them.
100%.
And so I agree with that. She was right on target with that assessment. But I really feel like that I really feel like that what we need to start looking at is getting away from the tools and the tactics and the funnels and those kinds of concepts, and just say, can we just sit down in 2 chairs and have a conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And not really find pressure points or pain points or anything like that, but just legitimate conversation. And if there's an opportunity for you to serve me or me to serve you, let's talk about what that looks like.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, I have this program and it's going to solve your problem for you. No, I don't want to go there anymore. I want to have a legit face-to-face where we're just going through it and saying, you know what, you matter to me. Is there something that I can do to help you? And here's what I'm going through. Do you have anything about that?
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's coming to it from an angle of mutuality rather than power over or power under. And That feels good to me to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering if, if that desire has been fueled by the observation of the opposite of that over the last chunk of time. I think that that's one of those things that I can relate to is when I see the lack of mutuality or I see a lack of caring and I feel the impact of that, that's a really intense thing.
Yeah.
And it certainly makes me aware of it more and aware of what would feel better, I guess, for lack of a better term.
In our last conversation about perfectionism, we kind of touched on the same idea that we have this pressure to show up as an expert who has overcome the problems, if not never had them.
Right.
And it's like there's an expectation that, that powerful person, has reached a point where they no longer struggle with this. And I feel like that's doing a disservice to both the seller and the sellee, because it's just not true. It can't be true.
Right.
Tony Robbins, Brendan Burchard, Richard Branson, they all go to the bathroom.
One can only assume.
Yeah, they have to, or they would be ill,
Right.
So the thing that's really interesting is like, I feel like that we've been sold a bill of goods that we have to show up glistening in order to be taken seriously as a helpful person.
Yeah, and I find it's difficult. I'm like, yes. And a piece of me is like, yeah, but you can't really do that. Right? Like you can't really do that. I want to do that, but like, can you really do that? I don't really, I feel that tug of war in myself when I think about that idea.
What's the friction?
I think there is it's a good question. I think that there's a lot of layers to that question. So I'm just kind of like letting it all, like my brain is like just like one of those, like you're like panning for gold or something, you're like sifting through the layers. That's kind of what's happening right now in my brain.
I'm happy to ride my canoe through your stream of consciousness.
So I'll reference it in terms of like how I view other people, because I feel like that also has a correlation to how I view myself too, where it's like when I'm looking to connect, and we talked about this too, where it's like I'm looking to connect with somebody mutually. I'm looking to connect with somebody who's human. But there is a bit of a balance of like not too unpolished, but like just polished enough, like professional enough to be taken seriously, but like not too, right? There's this kind of line that it feels like is being walked. And I think it's, for me, how I do things is test it out. How'd that go? How was that received? Are we okay? And I think sometimes we don't, and this is one of the most difficult things about the work that I do. And I think that a lot of us who have digital platforms is a lot of the times we don't get the feedback. So for instance, right, this is another humaning conversation. When you're in person with somebody, you get instant feedback. You're looking at their face, you're seeing their facial expressions. You're at least getting a flavor of, did that land well? They look like a little offended about that thing I just said, or like, oh, their eyes, they're leaning in, right? I'm looking at body expression and having an idea of how things are interacting, right? It's that relationship in between.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, I will put out something and I don't know, right? Is there no reaction because people didn't see this thing? Is there no reaction because people don't like it? So not having feedback is a very difficult, I think it's actually, when I talk to people and even in my own self, that is the most difficult thing for me is crickets.
Yeah.
I would rather somebody be like, this is crap, than say nothing, because
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm like, did you like it? Did you not like it? Is this valuable? Is it not valuable? I thought it was cool. Do you think it's cool? There's a lot of
Yeah.
that goes on in me. So I think that is the same thing, where that like conflict of showing up a certain way, how is this being received?
Yeah.
How are you receiving me in this way? And it matters, right? I'd love to
Yeah.
say like, well, show up however you want, say whatever you want, but it does matter ultimately, especially if you have a business. So
It's like the torturous wait for a phone call after the first date.
I feel like business is a lot of first dates,
Yeah,
like a
it is.
lot of them, like all the time. It's like dating, but money involved. I don't know. I mean, I don't know about that analogy, but like, yeah, there's a lot of that.
I've heard a lot of people, and I've used the analogy myself, that marketing is a lot like dating. That there's a lot of, you know, putting out something to see if there's interest, and if there's interest, is there a next level, and is there a next level after that? And it's like at some point people drop off. The pheromones run out, and
Honeymoon phase
who
is
knows
over.
what happens. You know.
Totally. Totally.
But I don't know. I'm curious, for this time of year for you. Do you have rituals that you turn to?
Yeah, it's funny. I have such a fraught is not the word. I have such an interesting relationship with this time of year, because on one hand, I love it. And on the other hand, um, I have to, it's important for me to keep myself engaged at a certain level, because if
Mhm.
I don't, I could probably spend the majority of my winter like curled up under a blanket, literally doing nothing. Like that's kind of where I will just go into full on hibernation.
Yeah.
And that's just not realistic, right? Like that's just not realistic. That's not gonna serve what I'm interested in doing. So, um, you know, uh, there's some newer rituals that I think having, going on is getting out of the house on a regular basis,
Yeah.
like doing physical activities that feel good. I'm out in the climbing gym on a regular basis, which is nice because that satisfies some of that human engagement, but it doesn't have to be like deep human engagement, but it is human engagement and being around people. Like I will go work in cafes now that feels like a good situation. So again, just like having some of that social engagement. Um, I am often in reflection mode
Yeah.
around this time of year, just kind of how has the year gone? Where do I think I want to be next year? There's a little bit of that goes along. I often I'll take a sabbatical between like mid-December and mid-January,
Yeah.
which is never completely a successful sabbatical, but like the intention is there and I do the best I can to honor it. Um and yeah, just trying to be present. I know that there'll be more familying going on. We have there's always, Christmas time is always a lot of traveling between my family and my husband's family. So
Yeah.
there's a lot more family connection and time, which can be nourishing and draining at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, but I think just generally the ritual of slowing down, honoring the slowing down, and then also keeping enough like juice and engagement in my system that I am still moving, as
Yeah.
opposed to just like shutting down for the winter.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
There are a couple of rituals that I've done every year since I was in my 30s. And one of them is that at the end of the year, I update my resume.
Mm,
And that's just a really good way to look at what are the skills that I've added, what are the experiences that I've gained. Um, are there any, are there any hallmark moments of awards or of recognition or of, highlights? And so that practice has been one that I've done for a really long time, and I found it really helpful. And I started it back in the old days when I actually was, looking for employment.
Makes sense.
Yeah, because it's like it was also a time for me to really evaluate the path that I was on. So the other ritual that I have at the end of the year is what's called an exit card. And the exit card is very simple. It's just you can answer openly the question, what needs to happen in order for me to stay moving in the direction that I'm moving? And to think more seriously about what are the things that need to be in place in order for me to continue in the direction that I'm going. And if I can't, you know, if I can't justify continuing in the direction that I'm going, that gives me an idea of the things that need to start to shift in a new direction.
Mm.
So those two things have been my pride and joy rituals for the year's end for going on 30 years now. And then there's also just the normal like rhythms of holidays and stuff like that. My wife and I are kind of from different backgrounds in that way. She grew up in an Italian family in the New York, New Jersey area, and not only every holiday, but every Sunday, pretty much, she grew up with a family around the table. And out here in Colorado, we're isolated from that kind of experience, and the closest family is my sister and my mom, who live an hour away, and we probably won't get together with them.
Mm-hmm.
So we find ways for the three of us to make it meaningful and make it special, and also to make it, for me, it has to be restorative. I do need to have downtime when downtime is allowed. And so we're thinking about our Thanksgiving now, and it's like, well, why don't we order out from a restaurant that's doing a Thanksgiving dinner, and then we'll come home and we'll have like a Marvel movie marathon or a Harry Potter movie marathon or something, whatever we can keep our kid engaged with, that kind of a marathon. And we'll take the dog for walks and go out to the sculpture garden and, do whatever we can do as a family just to reconnect and recharge with each other.
Yeah. I love that. I will be doing a Friendsgiving this year we have good friends who actually live 2 blocks away from us. So we're just going to literally walk over there.
Yeah.
They are foodies. We are sort of closet foodies. I mean, we're foodies, but I'm not like, I wouldn't call myself a foodie, but maybe I am. So we're actually going to try to fry a turkey this year, which will be, I'll let you know how that goes.
Yeah.
But same, we'll eat a bunch of food. We'll probably watch, like some marathon of Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or something like that. I'm sure we won't do Lord of the Rings this year. That's too intense. That's like 16 hours of insanity. But
I know.
But yeah, I was just thinking about when Christmas used to be more crazy for me. It was like jumping from relative's house to relative's house to relative's house. And a lot of this was when I was, either younger and didn't have the option, or was as a young adult and still was sort of in those grooves and like didn't really make a conscious choice to not be in them,
Yeah.
And I would excuse myself to go to the bathroom and just hide out in the bathroom.
Yeah, or find like the back porch where it's cold.
Right. Go somewhere where people don't want to go or will not bother you for a significant amount of time, because that restorative piece is, I think, such an important one to circle and star, because you can run through the entire holidays and feel so depleted at the end. And when you're that depleted, it's not easy to come back to homeostasis, right? If you've got no gas in the tank, it takes a long time to recover. So
yeah, longer and longer the older I get. Whenever I go to like social situations, I always make a beeline for the bookshelves, find a book, and then sit down and crack the book. And if somebody is interested enough to start a conversation, well, I'll talk to them for a few minutes. But actually, that's not true so much. I actually really enjoy one-to-one conversations in those kinds of settings, but the thing that's really intolerable for me is a lot of sensory stimulation, noise.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, it seems like it's a similar, it's a similar vibe in that we're talking about, I'm thinking about in-person, right? In-person parties, in-person networking, where there's the people who kind of want to flip from person to person to person and get like a little taste of every conversation. And then I think there's those of us who want to have a couple of impactful conversations that we're actually genuinely enjoying.
Yeah.
So, I imagine like knowing yourself as to what kind of person, what kind of context or conditions are most nourishing for you. Just like you were saying, how Kat said to you, like that connection is important, and maybe different types of connection are nourishing for different types of people. Knowing that about yourself is probably a very important thing to understand. Okay, what rituals are going to be feeling good to me and what rituals are not going to feel good to me? What kind of engagements or even client work, right, is going to feel good to me versus not? And being clear on that is a huge, takes some pressure off. Well, I don't know if it takes some pressure off, but is certainly helpful information.
Well, speaking of clients, let's talk about who are the people that you want to invite to be your clients now?
I have found this really, what's the word I want to use? I'm losing words lately. That's one of the things that I'm looking for words, and I can feel the ghost of the word in my head, but I can't find the actual thing to bite onto. Yeah. And I get close. I'm like, precipitous is the word I want to use, but I realize that's not the word. But anyway, what's been happening is I've had this really nice stream of clients coming in, and there's a very particular sort of location that they are in their life that I found is a really good sweet spot for me. Yeah. And these are people who have a kind of particular combination, right? These are people that would consider themselves like hard workers, right? They're not afraid of work. They're not afraid of getting their hands dirty. They've done some really they've really had to, at different points in their life, like put their head down and just muscle through, right? They've really done that. And they've had, what would be considered traditional success, whether that's in a self-employed situation or they own a company or they're in a job and they're really like, man, like they're nailing it, right? Yeah. Also, they're not strangers to personal work. So these are people who have done therapy, have experienced therapy, have therapists, that's, normal for them. They also have some concept around maybe some of the, meditation, mindfulness, all the good stuff. They have a concept of taking care of themselves, but they found themselves at this kind of strange location point where they have like a pause moment, right? Where they're sort of, they feel pause and they're looking around and they're kind of taking stock of their lives and their circumstances and their situations, going, okay, everything looks good here. Yeah. Right. I've got, financially things are good. I've got this great job. I've got these cool people around me. I can't identify anything here that's like, wow, this is really off, right? It's like, I can't, there's nothing here that is off, right? Yeah. And yet I feel like I feel slightly adrift. I'm not feeling satisfied. I'm not feeling the way that I expected to feel at this location on the map, right? Like I got to the location on the map, I arrived, and I'm not feeling it, right? What do I do? And so that's where I'm really interested in working with people, is because that's where I'm like, let's get in there. And how I've been describing it lately, which is feels pretty accurate, is it's the difference between like drinking a cup of coffee and being like, this is coffee. And drinking a cup of coffee and being like, ooh, I can taste the floral notes, or like, it's a dark roast or it's a light roast, or like, I like this with a little bit, more intense brew. It's becoming more of a connoisseur of yourself and getting more into the nuance of who you are as a human being. And that's what helps to make those sort of next stage decisions and all of that sort of stuff. So that's a really long description, but that is like really where I'm finding that I'm like, yes, when I identify people like that and I'm having a conversation, I'm like, oh, let's get to it. This is exciting for me.
As you were talking, it was like, I imagined that you're looking for people who they have the cake, they have the icing, but they want the decoration to be a little bit more, right?
Yes. Yes. Like,
So,
this is supposed to be delicious, and it is delicious, but like something's missing.
but those red roses really taste bad. Let's go something else.
Totally. Totally.
Well,
Yeah.
that
And I want to
sounds
ask you
cool.
the same question too.
Well, I I've been doing a lot of work with people who are creative people that have been kind of an impasse in their career. And I'm not done with that. I love doing that, and that's one of my primary streams of influence and help is
Mm-hmm.
when people are really feeling stuck, and they, especially if they're creative and they just have such a deep dissatisfaction with their career that they're ready really to try anything. So I'm going to continue to work in that direction. But the thing that's been really interesting is that over the past year, maybe 2 years, the people who have been finding their way to me are people who are, they're feeling like they want to do something along the lines of starting a podcast or starting a blog or starting a YouTube channel or creating an online course. And they don't want to just jump online and take the first program that they find. They really want to have kind of individual guidance as they move through it. And those folks have been really, really rewarding for me to work with. And so I'm kind of looking for more opportunities in that direction. People who are just ready to try something new, or to realize, a long-held dream to actually start and finish a book or something along those lines. So that's kind of the direction that I'm moving in. And then the other direction that I love to talk about, like I said, marketing is a passion of mine.
Mm.
But I really want to explore what's the best that marketing can be. I really want to explore what's the most humane that marketing can be, and what is the most. I want it to be something that people will look at and say, I'm not being sold to. I'm being honored. I'm being recognized. I'm being held here, rather than I'm being manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the directions I'm going in.
I love that. And when you're talking about the people who are that sort of second category that you were talking about, people who are looking for something new, it seems like a commonality in the things that you talked about, where it sounds like people using their voice or expressing themselves in a more outward manner. Would you say that that's consistent through people's journeys there?
Yeah. They're looking for a new vehicle for expression. Yeah, for sure.
So cool. I can see how it makes sense to me why you'd be such a good person for that journey with somebody.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, Audrey, I think we need to have more conversations like this and record them.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I like it. There's such a particular alchemy that comes with conversations with different people. And I realize that, right? And having podcast conversations or client conversations or just conversations in general, that things come up in conversation with you that are not going to come up in conversation with other people, right?
Yeah.
There's a very particular way that like my brain is going to think about things or react or respond in conversation with you versus somebody else. So I think that there's a really like unique alchemy that happens in conversation with us in this space, which is cool. And that's cool for listeners too, because you ain't going to find this conversation anywhere else. It's only happening here.
What's really interesting to me, and I'm going to go back to a C.S. Lewis reference. So there's some Christian terminology here that if you have any kind of difficulty with, I'll make it quick and painless. But one of the concepts that he had for the Trinity was the idea that there was a Father and a Son, and that the Holy Spirit was actually the personality of the relationship between the Father and the Son.
Mm.
And that has really stuck with me because I really feel like that every relationship has its own personality that's identifiable, even in a way that is its own thing apart from the two players.
It's its own entity.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it goes right back to what you were talking about with that relationship, that space in between, that uniqueness that happens between people. I love that. And you know what? I think it's a really important, I know we're wrapping, but I think it's a really important thing for people to consider because back to humaning, we're just working the theme here. But I think for a lot of people, and this is something that I find with a lot of the people that I work with that tend towards these perfectionist qualities, is there is often a sort of like mashing together of two people and not an awareness of like the space in between, and that there is this space in between, right? That it's like where we sometimes feel like we are so in relationship with a person that we're almost like, magnetically connected to them in some way. And that having that awareness of like, I'm me over here, you're you over there. And there's a space in between us that's actually being, created and changed and massaged and all that sort of stuff, I think is a really helpful, just reference for people to think about. So I think anybody who's listening to this, I like try that on for size, when you're sort of moving around the world and in relationship with people, especially if you're somebody that tends to get a little bit stuck up in other people's stuff, positive or negative, whatever, and consider that space in between, what that is and what that feels like.
I think that sounds like a pretty good place for us to leave off this conversation. Just to ask people to consider that, especially as we're going into this period of time that for some people is fraught with horror, and other people is just totally overwhelmed with joy. I feel like that it's a really good idea for us to just enter into this and say, what is this? What is this that's going on here between us?
Yes.
And I would invite people, if you've enjoyed this conversation, to let us know. And if you have insights into anything that we've talked about here, I would invite you to make sure that you comment wherever it is that you're consuming this.
Yeah, I'd love to know.
Well, Audrey, let's do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I love this conversation. I look forward to the next one.
My pleasure. People who work alone aren't antisocial, at least not most of us. If people think you're weird because you don't want to grow a big company and you'd rather spend most of your time working by yourself, you're just hanging around the wrong people. Your Own Best Company has a Facebook group that you're invited to join right now. We understand the urge to close the door, let your imagination run wild, and stay there until your creative impulse runs its course. We also understand the features and challenges that go along with running a business to support our solo flight lifestyles. Joining the group is free, and it's as easy as clicking the link in the channel description. So go there now and just join the group. Want to hear more where this came from? Subscribe to Your Own Best Company on your favorite podcast app or on the Franklin Taggart Coaching and Consulting YouTube channel. To get in touch with Franklin, send an email to yobc@franklintaggart.com. Thanks for listening.